Okay, this part of lesson 3 is about modification to Mendel's classic ratios lethal genes. Okay, so for if you remember, for the alleles that Mendel studied, it was really possible to get, homozygous, okay, there, homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, for example, and heterozygous genotypes. Okay, so that means none of these three genotypes, for example, affected the survival of the Pisum sativum or the pea plant that he used. However, this is not the case for all the genes and all alleles. So some genes or many genes actually are, in an organism's genome are needed for survival. So if an allele makes one of these genes non-functional or to take on an abnormal or maybe a harmful activity, it may be impossible to get a living organism with a homozygous or, in some cases, heterozygous genotype. So, now for some genes, some genes are lethal when both alleles are present. Okay? Lethality can actually occur, before or after ipanganak. So before or after birth. So some alleles are actually associated with human genetic disorders, either as recessive lethal or as dominant lethal. Okay? When they're present in the homozygous condition. Okay? So whether it's dominant or it's recessive. So some alleles associated with human genetic disorders are recessive lethal. Okay, for example, the allele that causes achondroplasia. Okay, achondroplasia, as you can see from the picture, is a form of dwarfism. Okay, for example, a person hetero for this allele. Okay, so a person heterozygous for achondroplasia will have short limbs, even short stature, or a condition that is actually not lethal, but you will see that they exhibit dwarfism. However, homozygosity for the same allele will cause death during embryonic development, or the first months of life, which is an example of recessive lethality. Okay, now Huntington's disease. So going back to achondroplasia, so if this is present, then it will be lethal. Okay, now in the case of Huntington's, as you can see here, Huntington's disease is an example of a dominant lethal. Okay, it's a lethal allele, but most of the time death occurs later in life. So this is what we call late onset disorder. Okay, that is why you will wonder if this is dominant lethal, dapat, let's say Huntington's, okay? H. This is for Huntington's. All right? Now, for Huntington's, if this were dominant, then this will be dead. Supposedly, a dominant allele masks the recessive, so this will be also lethal. But then, since this is a late onset type of disorder, uh, the person carrying the gene for Huntington's will still survive, maybe have progenies, and then later on in life die. Okay, so pwede pa rin siya magkaroon ng anak and pass down the gene for Huntington's. So, kaya po siya nasa population pa rin, hindi siya nawawala yung Huntington. So, some human disorders are also caused really by dominant lethal alleles like Huntington's. Okay? Sometimes there are even what we call this lethal genes or lethal alleles that can cause death when they are present in just a single copy. So, isa lang. So, if an allele leads to death of heterozygotes before birth, hindi mo na yon makikita in the living human population. okay, it will result to failure of implantation, uh, or will result to miscarriage kapag you only need a single copy of that gene. So even the hetero, or especially the homozygous, will not survive anymore. It will result to a miscarriage. Now, but like Huntington's, if the dominant lethal, okay, let's show you a picture because we have a US president actually uh, had, I know that's another disorder pala, Marfan. So this one is, oh, I don't have a picture of Huntington's because it's a neurodegenerative disorder. Wala talaga siyang very obvious anatomical, phenotype. Okay, so this other picture is also a recessive lethal, that's sickle cell anemia. So again, going back, if a dominant lethal allele allows heterozygotes to survive past birth, then it can be seen in the population as a genetic disorder like your Huntington's. Uh, if in fact, kung yung dominant lethal allele lets a person, survive even past or up to the reproductive age, then it may result to passing down of the trait to their children, like Huntington's disease, which is a fatal genetic disorder affecting the nervous system. Okay, since it's late onset, people who have Huntington's allele inevitably develop the disease, but they may not show any symptoms until about age 40 or later. And then so syempre unknowingly they were able to pass this trait already to their children, na makikita din ng children nila pag nag-reach sila ng age of 40 or higher. Okay? Okay, moving on. Another example in lethal genes is the creeper allele in chickens. So in chickens, when an embryo contains two copies of the dominant gene known as creeper, the embryo dies inside the egg. So two copies, let's check. Two copies of the dominant gene, so two uppercase C, will result to the embryo dying inside the eggshell. Now, chicks, however, heterozygous for the gene survive but will display the creeper phenotype. So, ano yung creeper phenotype? Okay, ito yung shortened leg din or shortened limbs. Okay, now, yun, parang stunted siya, pandak na manok, kumbaga. So, since as mentioned earlier, creeper is a dominant gene, what happens if you cross two heterozygous creeper chickens? So let's see. This is a creeper and another creeper. So hetero sila. Okay, what will be your phenotypic ratio? Okay, normally if you have this, so you will have 1 CC, 2 hetero, and 1 homozygous recessive. So normally this would be 3/4 having the dominant should be creeper, and then 1/4 should be normal. But since this is lethal, okay, you will have an output or an offspring ratio of, that's phenotypic ratio, you will have 2/3 ito na creeper, means chickens who survive but are stunted because they have the creeper gene, this one, and you have 1/3 normal. Okay, so this is for the creeper allele, okay, in the chicken. Okay, it is dominant. So kapag meron ito, creeper siya. But in the homozygous condition, it's lethal. Okay. Okay, we now go to another example. So a while ago, creeper and Huntington's, they're examples of dominant lethal, and then you have the cystic fibrosis, the achondroplasia, and what was that? Sickle cell anemia. It's recessive lethal. So in this case, Manx cats, So Manx cats is also an example of a, where will I write that? Recessive lethal gene. Okay, so you call it Manx. So Manx cats, who possess a heterozygous mutation, will have no tails, or shortened tail. So when ito ang tawag sa Manx. Okay, now kapag uh, what will now happen if you cross two Manx cats? Okay, so two heterozygous Manx cats. So let's use the letter M. So this is a Manx cat. You cross it with another Manx cat. Okay, so again, like earlier, this will be your genotypic ratio. So how about the phenotypic ratio? So the phenotypic ratio will be, since it's recessive lethal, what does that mean? It means that this one will be lethal, okay? And this one will be normal cat, and this one, the two, will produce Manx. So like earlier, 1/3 will be normal, and then 2/3 will be Manx cats, and then the recessive condition will be lethal. Okay. Now we go to the next slide. Okay. Now a classic example actually of an allele that affects the survival is that of the mouse. Okay, the lethal yellow allele. Okay, it's actually a spontaneous, it's a type of spontaneous mutation in mice. Okay, it makes their coats yellow. Okay, uh, it was actually discovered by Lucien Queneau. Wow, I don't know how you pronounce that, but I remember it's Lucien. So he noticed that it was inherited in a very unusual pattern. Okay, so what happened was, when yellow mice were crossed with normal brown, they produced half yellow and half brown. So it means that yellow mice were actually heterozygous, and that the yellow allele, okay, was dominant. So kasi kumbaga, um, let's follow the notation used here. So A is agouti, that's the brown, and the A to the Y is the yellow. So it says here that if you cross a hetero yellow with a brown, was that the cross? Okay, what will happen is half of your offsprings, okay, that's 2:2 or 1:1, yellow is to agouti, or 50% yellow, one half yellow, and then one half agouti, or 50% agouti. So this indicates that yellow is actually dominant over brown. Okay, so when what Lucien discovered, however, was when he crossed two yellow mice, okay, with each other, they produced yellow and brown, but the ratio uh, that he got was not 1:2:1, or even 3/4 is to 1/4. Okay, the yellow offspring did not breed true. Okay, uh, why was this the case? Showing you this, let's see, yan, C class, because when the two yellow mice were crossed, what happened was a homozygous yellow, so that's your AY, was lethal. Okay, so it's another example of a dominant lethal. So the yellow being dominant, but in the homozygous condition, it's lethal. So what survived were 2/3 yellow and 1/3 agouti. Okay? So, ganun ang nangyayari. This is what happens when it's lethal, whether it's dominant lethal or recessive lethal. In the homozygous condition, depends on what trait we are talking about. A homozygous will not survive. Okay? Although the special condition Huntington's, also lethal in the homozygous, and it's late onset. So namamatay yung carrier nung dominant gene later on in life. So kaya po, even if it's dominant lethal, it gets passed down to the offsprings. Okay? Okay, this is just to show you what happens for another cross sowing. It shows you the same thing anyway. So if you cross two agouti, since this is recessive, all of the agouti will survive. But if you cross um, uh, an agouti with a yellow, half will be agouti and the other half will be yellow. Okay, showing you that yellow is dominant. But when you cross two yellow mice, okay, only 2/3 of the yellow will survive and 1/3 will be agouti, and they are survivors. And why is this? Because class, you do not count the dead, okay, in your phenotypic ratio. Okay, so when you are asked, kapag may patay po doon sa offspring, you don't count them anymore or you don't include them anymore in your phenotypic ratio.